Hello, I'm Jim Tolles. I'm a spiritual teacher. I blog at spiritualawakeningprocess.com and I do these videos here on my Jim Tolles YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about spiritual awakening as a beginning. And before I go any further, there's a bunch of links down below this video that I invite you to check out after you watch this to help you go further in understanding this topic and how to best appreciate it. When I talk about awakening, I talk about the awakened energy that moves intelligently on its own. It intelligently dissolves the ego and draws us closer towards a perception and an understanding, a realization of what is real. And in that space, that's freedom. Because when you know it is real, you can interact with it. If you don't know something is real, it's difficult to interact with it. For example, they've recently, in the last couple of years, proved the existence of gravitational waves. Well, we can't really interact with those or do anything with them until we know that they're real. Now that we know that they're real, who knows what scientists will decide we can do with that, and how we can use those principles to, I don't know, fly a spaceship to another galaxy or something like that, which would be pretty awesome, right? But before then, it doesn't exist, so you can't do anything with it. If you don't understand how electrical energy works, if you can't see that reality, you can't do all the things we do today to light homes and power computers and power cars and all the different things there. It doesn't exist. And there's a lot of different ways where our illusions layer on top of all sorts of different situations and cause all kinds of suffering because we don't really understand things. So in the world of relationships, we often are projecting our ideas onto other people, and so we don't see them as they are. And when they do something that doesn't fit the story that we're projecting onto them, that causes all sorts of suffering. When that illusion drops away and we see more of who they are acting as, whoever they think they are, then it's easier to respond to them from that place of reality. I'm not talking about ultimate reality even. Ultimate reality is we're all one. And it's all energy, it's all consciousness. That's ultimate reality. I just mean the next layer of appreciating somebody in their own delusions and how they're interacting. So for example, somebody who's got a lot of pain and trauma from childhood who's hooked on meth, right? We don't necessarily need to see that they're part of God. They are. We all are. It's like this one big giant quilt, and we're all different little patches in that big, beautiful, divine quilt. But we have to understand what that little patch is going to do. And how do you respond to that reality versus if we decide, oh, they're fine or they'll figure it out, right? These are illusions people place onto others who have addiction. And, that doesn't help. So awakened energy dissolves these delusions and we start to see, oh, this person has a meth problem. This person is really good at sciences. This person is not driving their car very well, so I should probably give them more space when I'm driving on the road. There actually is some very, very practical ways that this shows up in everyday life. Sometimes the awakened stuff and spirituality gets too mystical and people kind of act like it's this supernatural thing, and it really isn't. It is an everyday thing. It's a very realistic, practical, here you are now sort of a thing. The initial experiences people have that they often call as awakening aren't necessarily what I call awakening. It usually takes a while to find out, is this energy moving independently on its own, or was it just a spiritual opening of some kind? Initial experience that gives a person a taste that life may be more than what they were used to seeing. And since for a lot of people that is an initially enjoyable experience, they want to get it back. I don't want to go further. They don't want to even consider that there are so many levels of the ego that have not been dealt with yet. That they like these moments where it's like, oh, I had this great moment. I have this revelation. I had this blissful experience. I had this dissolving into a state of oneness. Whatever it was in that openness. A lot of people just decide we're done. This is it. This is the top of the mountain. This is not the top of the mountain. This is the beginning. Because if it's an opening and not an awakening as I described, you're going to need to have a lot more discipline. The discipline is key to start to dissolve the ego and to look within, because otherwise that ego is not going anywhere. And if you give an ego something it wants, it's not going to complain most of the time. So usually what happens with these things is this bliss phase lasts. If it's an opening, what happens is the person just normalizes out of it, and then they just want to get it back. And then, for the awakened, the bliss phase ends, and then you drop into inner work. And it's just like all the sludge of yourself starts to barf itself up. And that's where a lot of people think they've done something wrong when they haven't. This is just how the process works, because you have so many attachments inside. And the problem is that people don't realize how many attachments. We are always ignorant to our ignorance. It sucks. We don't know what we don't know. And this is why humility is one of those key steps that has to happen in the beginning, right at the time when the ego doesn't want to have anything to do with humility, not in a real way. The humility to say, I don't know myself, is profound. Later on, after you've been through like 50 issues and you can still see that there's more down there, then you've been humbled and you're like, yeah, I don't know anything, but I'll keep surrendering and keep scooping stuff out because I feel so much better. I feel freer, lighter, more at ease, more clear about what's real, more loving, more kind. All those things kind of become like a reflex. You don't have to try to be a good person. Things just arise as they arise. But doing that scooping is not what the ego wants, and the ego has so many objections. Like, I'm not a bad person. It's like, no one's saying you're a bad person to have attachments. But the human being has tons of attachments. From basically in utero to like ages 8 to 10, 12, we set up our initial sense of ourselves and our initial ego and all that stuff. And that's all done unconsciously. We don't remember those decisions. If you can remember a couple of them, and it's usually in later childhood, that's helpful. Say, oh, this is a key moment when I learned I should never quit, which is a problem because sometimes you should quit. There's some things we let go. Right? This space of freedom gives us this flexibility to go into something and to be diligent and committed, and other times to let go. And that's the importance of being free in life. Otherwise, we can get stuck doing things we shouldn't. And this is with, ostensibly, a positive trait. The never quit is considered a positive thing. Commitment is good, but there are times when we should absolutely quit, and never in any sort of absolutes, never, always. Those aren't based on reality. Those are human concepts. There are very few things fall into the never or always category. So anytime you hear that in your words or in your thinking or your journaling, you should be on guard. The ego is at work. If you realize that you are in the beginning now, that this initial experience, it's just come and gone, which was, I assume, enjoyable, because that's why people want to not do any work. It's like they feel like they got what they're supposed to. The next steps are to go further inside in your own self-inquiry, and that's going to be different for each of you depending on where you are on your journey. If you're brand new to it, right, starting with meditation, learning to ask questions like, who am I? And writing that down. And there's a blog post I call Mapping Out Ego Structure, which is a useful way to start to visualize all the stuff that's in here that's defined who you think you are. For someone further along on the path, sometimes you have to do a spiritual reset because you may have gotten lost in ideas or lost in experiences. Because the ego doesn't know what freedom is, it's usually guessing. And that's the big problem with a lot of long-time spiritual seekers. So until you have a moment like this, it's like, well, I hear it should be blissful. I guess we should try this, or somehow I should make myself peaceful, or I should make my mind quiet, right? And so you can see sometimes, even if you're in a group meditation, it's like there's some people who look like they're trying to meditate. It looks really painful. It's like they're trying to somehow shut down their thoughts. So it's like this more resistance that they're creating, and it looks horrible. For those who have the awakened energy as I describe it, you're in for the ride now, and this is something that you have to make space for. And there's certain kind of practical things we attend to. It's like, if I'm going to go through major transition and transformation, then I'm going to need space and time and money, and that's just the reality of it. And a lot of people aren't willing to make that sort of dedication. And I don't really have any good advice for that, because you're going to suffer a lot, while that energy moves, until it gradually runs out of juice, because everything kind of has a certain time and place in life. For those, who can make it, and through the transformation, all that sort of stuff, we end up just kind of flowing throughout your life. So it doesn't ever feel like it stops. It just feels like there's less resistance to it. So it's not like a plateau. A plateau, you just end up doing kind of the same things, thinking the same sort of ways. A repetition is one of those key signs that you're stuck in your ego. Anyway, I have a lot of different resources on it. As I said, check out the links down below this video. The bigger point here is to appreciate that awakening and some of these initial spiritual openings are beginnings. That they're not the total realization, that whenever the ego thinks it's seen everything, it has not. We never see everything, right? We're back in the absolutes, and that's a problem. And to think that we're immediately ready to share it, right, this happens as well, is a lot of arrogance. And we just don't realize how arrogant that is, to have one experience and then decide we've realized the totality of oneness and now we should show and teach other people. We want to know ourselves first. The more you can know yourself, then that opens up the reality that you can teach and heal and help and whatever you feel called to do, build community. That's really important, I think, through knowing yourself that this is something you actually want. Because there's a whole host of ego issues hiding out down below that like to take an experience like this and then try and fill the problems that are going on inside that the person's still trying to ignore. Self-worth issues being a major one. That for somebody who's never felt good enough, it's like, oh wow, I felt great in this experience. I want to keep this experience. I want to make other people feel good. Because making other people feel good also makes me feel good. There's a lot of things that happen. And this creates a lot of wounded healers, incomplete spiritual teachers, and occasionally the false teacher, but the false teacher is pretty rare. These are people who are knowingly deluding people. It's more often people just, they're really excited, and that's nice. It's kind of like, when you're a kid and you find something that's brand new to you, you're like, oh wow, this is amazing, I want to do this all the time. It's like, well, maybe not. It's like Legos were awesome when I was a kid. I played with them a ton. I'm not really playing with them anymore. They served a purpose, and so those initial moments, whether it's the awakening at the start or some sort of opening, they're beautiful. But let them be inspiration to go within and to go deeper, and to have the humility to understand that as human beings, we have a ton of unconscious space, and that unconscious space will stay there until we go within to face it. I hope these thoughts have been helpful. Once again, my name is Jim Tolles. You can find more of my stuff on my Jim Tolles YouTube channel and at my blog, spiritualawakeningprocess.com.